Episode 8 of the still untitled Blood Bowl podcast is here. We are officially past the halfway point of the season. Things are starting to heat up. How are you feeling?
I feel like I'm in pretty good shape, but I got some like really tough opponents still left to fight in the league. This week we're going to be talking about the business management side of Blood Bowl teams. How are you feeling? I don't think you've really got a whole lot of breathing room over there.
Yeah, looking at the standings, we're going to obviously talk a little bit about as the playoff race is heating up. Our division is currently a clean cut between 8th and ninth, and I am 8th. So looking to maintain that in a similar position to you where there are still some games that are concerning as far as in division, but the interdivision game as well is getting very interesting. That pool has narrowed drastically, and there's a bookend that you could play against as far as some of the top teams in that division, as well as some of the like worst performing teams. But still, anyone can win any game.
Right, right.
Nothing's
Even if
guaranteed.
you draw goblins in your individual, that could be just like a kind of a crapshoot, just the way the goblin team works sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes the goblin bag of tricks just does a bunch of damage. Now, normally dwarves are pretty comfortable against goblins, right? You would much rather fight goblins than say like Jim's Necro team. Necro is just really good in the dwarves.
Mhm.
But yeah, interdivisionally, a lot of it'll get deterministic at some point, but yeah, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to breathe easy if you know you've got uh, good matchups remaining. And for you, I think particularly, who knows? It's
Yeah, yeah,
it's it's a, it's literally a coin flip, right?
yep. That's what I'm looking at. But yeah, we've got most of our week 7 games to go over now. Most of them are finished up. Missing a couple from Snake Eyes division that will be happening at some point later in the week. Those are the Gnarly Oaks, Bad Moon Rising, and the Blood Moon Gang versus the Electric City Maulers. So no updates there. If you want to hear our takes on that, you can listen to last week's episode. But Devon's Hand Division, first game up, we have Book of Grudges, first return to Monkey. And there was a trend that continued this week for that week 7 game, which was a Bull Centaur getting taken out for the following week.
Yeah, on paper, if you were ogres, you really didn't want to play Chaos Dwarves. That was prior to the Chaos Dwarf. We're calling it we'll generously call it an update. Might be better worded as a straight up nerf. But now Chaos Dwarves without the tackle, you would hope that your Ironheart skin would give you a lot more durability versus ogres, but it just looked like Ide was getting pushed around. That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah. Losing a Bull Centaur is such
Uh,
a huge detraction from the team. I think at this point, with that update, that's like the big draw to the team is Bull Centaur as a player is just incredible.
they're very good players. They're very fast. They're kind of what you want. Like ideally, if you're Chaos Dwarves, the kick kind of goes deep into the ogre backfield, and the ogres are tied up towards midfield, and then you can peel off like two bull centaurs to go bully some noblars in the backfield. But who knows if that happened?
Hmm.
When I played Sean, the last time I played Sean playing ogres in a league setting was like a long time ago, and I think Sean has substantially grown as a player since then. But on the initial kickoff, I put it in the sweet spot. The ball scattered six forward and landed on an ogre's head on the line, and that ogre rolled a six to catch the ball, and so it spent the whole half in the hands of an ogre, and I had no real good way to take it. Um, so something like that could happen in this game, where if the ball ends up in the hands of an ogre, you got to get a minotaur to the ogre to really kind of threaten it. Who knows? The Minotaur probably had its hands full in that game. You're asking a lot from the Minotaur in an
Mhm.
ogre matchup.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, he's probably going to be your blitz, but it's like real tempting to blitz with bull centaurs or dwarves into noblars because noblars just drain SPP. If you can get them on the ground, that's step one to reaping a bunch of SPP from them.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a 2-0 win for the Ogres in that game. Next up, we got the V Stars and Teal Terror, the elf on elf violence of week 7. 2-1 win for the V Stars. This is another game where Mike took Swift-Vine.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
I'm willing to bet I didn't hear any major reports about Swiftfine. And a 2-1 elf box score kind of implies to me that one team scored, the other team scored, and then the other team ran out the half and then scored, something like that. And um, I think Mike really needed that win if he wanted to keep his playoff dreams alive, because he's fighting for his life at this point in the season. I mean, he's had some good wins recently. If at this point in the season, it's fun to look at like how people have done over the last stretch of games.
Mhm.
So the last 4 games, Mike has gone 2-2. And so hopefully this win can help him get some momentum going.
Right. Absolutely. We've got up next the Imperial City Retainers and the Rotten Peaches. That was a 3-1 win for the Amazons. And the update on that game will be coming to your Substack feed soon.
Yeah, some of it's in the Discord and talking to Fred. It sounded like he had a narrow chance to tie this up. And one of the funny interactions of the new version of Blood Bowl occurred where a pass went kind of astray, but still ended up in the hands of the person on your team. So a turnover didn't happen. But that wasn't quite enough to win the game. We'll look forward to Fred's update on what happened from there. So
Yeah. Also, on the Substack, we take a second to plug it. We've got an article up from Fred, the Imperial City Retainers Goofy Guide to Skills and Randoms. So, if you want a subscribed non-competitive look
Mhm.
at how Fred came to get Leap on a gutter runner, that's a good way to get into that. I'm sure we'll have an official response coming at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, if I start writing articles about uh how Fred and I differ as a player, that article would just turn into a novel, I think.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We get a modern day version of the Federalist and anti-Federalist papers.
yeah,
So,
right.
next game up, Might of Asgard, Parceros Nocturnos. That was a tie. Seemed from the recap I got, there was a little bit of a mix up on being able to hand off. So that affected the way the game played out at the end, and the Dark Elves weren't able to get the score to win at the
Yeah,
end.
so disturbing presence, I believe, is what the sticking point was in that game. The there was an attempt to make the handoff near the Yeti, and the Yeti affects passing attempts. Disturbing presence does at least affects passing attempts and catching attempts, and a handoff is considered an accurate pass as far as the rules of the game are concerned. And so the model who is receiving the handoff is making a roll to catch the ball. And so that is a catch attempt. So you can use the catch skill. In previous versions of the game, Sure Hands would let you re-roll a handoff attempt because it was like mechanically slightly different than the way handoffs work in this. And this handoffs are considered an accurate pass. The catch still is a catch. That's why the nobility blitzers are so awesome at handoffs because they have the catch built in.
Mhm.
Um, and so, so yeah, you get a reroll if you use the catch skill, but Disturbing Presence still gives you the -1. And so it was apparently the attempt was a 2 re-rolled into a 2, and so the ball just went astray. So the game ended up being a 1-1 tie because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was a win that both those players wanted. Like it would have been a little
Yeah.
bit better for either one to get that win.
I think Austin is probably happy with the points,
Mhm.
right? If you're in the playoff hunt, which Austin firmly is at this point, um, you want points from a game as long as it's not zero. You don't want too many draws, but there's so many draws in the Dead Man's Hand division where those draws aren't gonna like necessarily hurt you because so many of the people that are also in the playoff hunt also have draws on their record.
Mhm.
So I think Austin's happy with points in this game.
Yeah, especially I think draws are you're happier with draws. I think if you're drawing with someone who's ahead of you,
Yeah,
because that's like you're still maintaining ground. Like there's a world where if you draw someone below you, then the next week you lose your game and they get a win, then you're getting jumped,
right.
and that's gonna make it a little more treacherous at that point.
Yeah,
Next game up was my game. I was playing against the Jolly Rotters. That was a 1-0 win, and it was kind of a wild game to start. So this was the first Death Roller game.
okay.
Um,
You were possessed by the Roly spirit.
yes, the Roly Spirit came through, and in addition to getting the Death Roller, I still also got a decent pile of money for the game. So I was able to get Cindy. I was able to get a Dwarven Runesmith, and I was defending on the first drive. So kicked the ball off, and Runesmith was able to go off, get Horns and Juggernaut on Troll Slayer. Also rolled a Blitz. So
That's a very good way to start a drive, I'd say.
yeah, and at the end of the Blitz, there was a mummy that was stunned.
Nice.
So it was like the best start I could hope for. Kind of collapsed one side of the field to start. And Cindy was just a menace the entire game. In the past, Cindy has not been a great inducement for me, but this time she was able to just go ahead, knock multiple players down multiple turns in a row. And by the time that Clay was able to get back and knock her down, he didn't break armor. So she was able to stand up, give an assist on the person who knocked her down to hit that white away, and then she was able to sneak out, give an assist to a for a 2-9 block on the ball carrier. So was able to prevent the score in the first half. There was a long string of dice rolls I could have made to try to score on the last turn. Didn't fully pan out. But going to the second half, City did her job. We had the Death Roller come in for that half, and Death Roller just was bullying players around the pitch. Um, it got to the point where there were two doors that got knocked out in like subsequent blocks, which is a little scary being down two players, but the it really just came down to a long string of die rolls at the end. He Clay was able to recover the ball and then failed to dodge, so the ball came out, and I was able to pick it up. Had to dodge with the death roller to get away from just a random skeleton that was tying it up, to then go mark off the mummies to make a lane to score, and scored on the last turn. So it was a pretty wild game.
Yeah. Sounds like some rolls went your way at the right time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was definitely, I think Clay said it was like the most frustrating game he played like this season, which understandable. It was a
Yeah.
lot of Cindy can just do so much work on
Yeah.
a team that can't get up and get away.
Yeah. As someone who was a recent victim of concerted bombing effort, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Spanish Civil War, I can empathize with somebody losing to repeated bombs. So
Mm. Yeah, that's wraps it up for Dead Man's Hand. Snake Eyes Division will be a little bit quicker because there just aren't as many games done.
yeah,
As I already talked
missing a
about.
couple games. As we've said on the previous podcast, this is not too unusual for a Blood Bowl league. Honestly, I think our Blood Bowl league is probably extremely prompt with getting games played. Ultimately, just honestly, based off of how many moving pieces there are in a league, I mean, we got 26 people in this league, so that's quite a bit to coordinate from week to week. So at this point, the leagues are really devoted people. So a lot of times, like Jim, for instance, in the past, he's had business trips where he's been away for a week or two, but he will play his games back to back to back to get caught up really fast.
Mm.
So anyway, the Plague of Gods lost to the South California Trojans this week. It looked like the team has come together. It was firing on all cylinders, and the game was not a good game for the Tomb Kings, and then it became a disaster because they lost their thrower.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at it, it seemed like the Tomb Kings team had been able to kind of control the board a little bit better in previous games and also peel players, which just was not an aspect that existed for this game. Lots of blodgy elves, not really anything to deal with blodge players on the Tomb King roster right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw
So,
that, but it was also a blizzard. And
yeah.
that cannot favor Tomb Kings because they're the slower team in that matchup, which means going for it is worse for the slow team. It's like dwarves. Dwarves don't really want a blizzard. Yeah, the blizzard can help cut down the passing game, but if you're slow versus a fast team, especially something like elves where they dodge away from you and they can just kind of reposition and rescreen, you don't have what it takes to be able to disrupt it, and you're constantly taxing your rerolls.
Mhm. Yeah. Next game up, we had the Slee Stacks and the ROUS. I watched part of this game, and in the first half, it seemed like pretty close. Both players are kind of failing a bunch of things, going back and forth. Turnovers were happening at a pretty high rate, and then the RUS on turn 8 were able to make a series of rolls to get the ball and kind of make a miracle score on that turn to go up 2-0, and then the second half seemed to just be
Yeah,
all Skaven. It was a 5-0 win.
right. Jeremy was telling me he didn't protect the ball very well, and that's just like if you can't hang on to the ball versus Skaven, it's going to end up in the hands of the gutter runners, and the point total is going to be really, really high. It doesn't even take a whole lot of failures for Skaven to get up 3-0 on you. And so, yeah, I think this was probably a pretty good lesson for Jeremy about the power of gutter runners. Uh, so I hope you're listening to this, Jeremy, and I hope you take that away. don't let the don't let those gutter runners near the ball if you can help it.
All right, last game for this division is No and the Great Tree Good Boyus. It's a 3-0 win for the Gnomes. Seem to be uncharacteristically low casualties for the undead team. So, which I guess a bunch of wrestling players, that's
Yeah,
gonna happen.
I think so. My theory for gnomes, they've existed for almost a year now. My theory on gnomes is that they are good into the games, into the teams that stunties were traditionally bad against, and they are bad into the teams that stunty teams were uh good against. I hope I said that correctly. But so the bashier teams against gnomes have tools to disrupt that. They can absorb an amount of bash back, that, and they can deliver a decent amount of damage because you got like two tree men, and you got stuff like wrestling people to the ground and fouling them, and then they have some mobility. And so in those games where you can bog down a bunch of players, you can have like the fox go grab the ball from a ghoul who got wrestled to the ground and then go score. And I'm wondering how much of that happened in this game. Um, so I didn't get to see it directly. It was happening near me, and there was a lot of like chuckling about stuff that had occurred in the game. So it could be one of those where the undead team was just failing three ups.
Mhm.
You'll have those games with agility three teams where you fail a good chunk of your three ups, and you're just like, why do I play this game at all? It's so stupid. Um, and and then the other team is also like a three up agility team, but they're making all their rolls. So I'm that's what it appears to be that occurred here. So
Mm. Last game for the week, our interdivisional game of Salesmen with a 2-1 win over the Zero Luck Shucks. We got a Coop recap.
yeah, I'm gonna edit this for podcast purposes. We had some so from Coop, his report is despite some name pending lighthearted B wording from a T1 casualty against Jurgen's troll and a casualty on the sneak get on turn three, the remainder of the first half was 50% KO or casualty from 1.5 blocks a turn from the Blorks. And the second half kept to that pace. He only failed two inconsequential pushes in the game. He did lose his leader, which hurt him because he's playing his Dark Elves with no rerolls. Um, Caused him to fail some key blitzes and hold the game to a tie. And Jurgen was at least kind enough to wait until turn six to have six or more of my players off the pitch. So this is one of those games where every time you manage to catch an elf, you do actually punish the elf. And so, yeah, I think this one was probably like Jurgen was like slightly ahead in the game and managed to ride that out for a win. And so, yeah, Coop's Dark Elves either win the game or they explode.
Mm.
So I guess that's an appropriate response for somebody called the Zero Luck Chuck. So
Also, someone using the Detroit Lions logo.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Our in memoriam segment this week, not super long. Uh,
Some decent names on it though.
yes. We got Sif, the Valkyrie for Might of Asgard. Austin, I think, had a player die like 4 weeks in a row at this point. Most of the
That's
time they were journeymen, but this one is unfortunately a Valkyrie with skill.
that's not unusual for Norse. That's just the risk of playing Norse. You don't go into a season thinking all of your Norse players are going to make it all the way through. I'll tell you that from experience.
Up next, we had Frozen and Burned, the thrower for Plague of the Gods, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, this was a leader, which I think Ness really wanted on his team because he's trying to keep his inducements low so he can hire some of those star players for Undead. And one good way to keep your inducements low is to not buy infinite rerolls. And so leader is a very reasonable pickup. Losing leader kind of hurts because you're basically down a reroll.
Yeah. Then we had Metal Slime, lineman for Great G Goo Boyus. I think this might be the second time that Metal Slime has been uh,
Yeah, I mean, if we're taking bets on teams that are going to lose players every single week, I think the halflings, the goblins, the Norse, and the gnomes are all equal candidates. So
hmm, yeah. And then finally, in our trend of star players dying, Acorn the Squirrel smashed to death by a rat. Uh,
that's a
It
shame.
is, yeah, it was a point in the game where I think that was like turn 8, and just like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to throw this block and just
It's
killed it.
smash, yeah,
Yeah.
smash it to pieces.
Also, in the section I'll talk about, we do have one team that is retiring from the league for now. Parceros Nocturnos is going to be dropping for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a coach. He's got experience, from what I understand, of the from the pre 2020 rules. His name's Joel. You may know him if you've played 40K in the store. He's apparently also setting up a 40K tournament for the store. So for the handful of people who may have some crossover appeal there, he's going to be the tournament organizer for a tournament in May for 40K. And he'll be stepping in. He's playing Skaven, which is funny because I think John Jennings now has to play Skaven 2 weeks in a row because
Mhm.
of this. But yeah, he's bringing skating to the table. He has played a lot of Blood Bowl prior to the 2020 rules set, and honestly, I think the 2020 rule set is not that huge of an adjustment if you had a lot of reps of the game before now. It's just getting slightly used to the small nuances between it, but blocking and all that stuff works basically the same.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. All right, with that, let's jump into our dive on
team management.
team management. So when we're talking about team management, what do you see as like the all-encompassing, like what do you consider under that umbrella?
Yeah, so I think of it as like the video game football manager.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
right? We're not. This is I think the weak point for a number of coaches in the league is like managing their team over a whole season. And this is like not even stuff that has to do with the game, right? I'm not even talking about necessarily leveling up players, right? We've talked about some leveling up before, but this is like, what does your roster look like? Uh, when do you retire a player? If somebody takes a stat down, what stat downs are basically the same as them dying. That's kind of the discussion here. Talking about managing the treasury throughout the whole season. I think the treasury matters a whole lot once you get to the playoffs. I think there's like the treasury matters a lot when you are still building out your team,
Mhm.
and then treasury stops mattering once you've got your team kind of where you want it to be, and then the treasury matters a whole lot for the playoffs. So just the way that diminishing returns work on the treasury is like a huge thing to manage throughout the league. So all of this kind of like encompasses the meta management of your team, even outside of a game. These are like decisions you can make in between games. So yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about actual just player management. We've seen lots of players this season take some debilitating injuries. Kind of that some players just like yo-yoing between having a player one positional, the other one being out. Then the next week, the one that was in got injured, and then the other one comes back. Some stat downs in there. Like, what's your heuristic if you have one on keeping injured players on a team? Like you mentioned, some are good as dead. Like, what are your good as dead?
Yeah, I think in virtually all cases, a strength down is as good as dead. And I think very few people would argue with that. Strength is an incredibly important stat. It's especially important for specific, like big guys or positionals. Anybody who's four strength, a strength down is like you're paying a premium price tag for that four strength on the model as they are. And then if they get a strength down, if you get a strength up, it costs you 80K in team value. But if you get a strength down, it doesn't subtract anything from your team value. So it's like you are paying 80K for that player by keeping them on the roster with a strength down, even if they have stats, even if they have level ups, right? There might be an edge case with like a gutter runner that has four skill ups. I might consider it, but I don't know. I would be hard pressed to leave that player on the roster with strength downs. I think strength down is the one that is the most likely to retire.
Mm, yep. Trying to come up with some sort of scenario what I could think of. Like, would horns impact that at all for you? Because you can kind of
No,
equalize on the blitz.
no, not even really. The problem is Horns is good on offense, it's not good on defense, right? And so the thing is strength is one of the passive things a character can have that will keep them alive.
Mm,
Um, you've got that combined with armor. You've got that combined with block or dodge defensively, or iron hard skin. All of these things are things that when your opponent is rolling dice, they reduce the number of dice results that result in your character being dead, right? Now, uh, armor down. if a character takes an armor down, I usually consider that character they may as well be dead at some future point. Okay. The way I view it is that you are renting that character for a certain amount of time. Especially if you were like an armor 8 character and you take an armor down to go down to armor 7, that like your chances of being exploded every time you get touched just start creeping up more and more with armor downs. I don't necessarily swap people out. It depends, right? If a player is disposable, a thrall, a snotling, uh, a human lineman, and they have no SPP, they get a stat down. I've got the money in the treasury. Swap the player out. There's not really there's no incentive to keep an easily injured player on your team. But if somebody has stat ups or levels and they get an armor down, that's where I'm like, well, they're probably going to get killed at some point. But there's so much incentive to keep them around. Armor value is only like 10K worth of team value, right? So keeping them on the roster isn't that big of a hit. Movement down depends on the position. Like a movement down gutter runner, I'd probably retire. Movement down 8 movement characters, probably retire. But say movement down on like a dwarf, you probably keep them around. It's not as if they're necessarily zooming around the field as it was before. You can probably keep them on the roster, especially if they have some sort of stat up or any sort of skill up.
Yeah. Obviously, Treasury is another topic you mentioned. That one, as someone who had expensive mistakes happen last year, um, because of a timing thing, that's like one where I definitely try to keep on top of that. Do you, at this point in the season, we see some pretty hefty treasuries in the league. Like, is there a number where you start to think like, oh, I should be doing something with this?
Yeah, so once you start, once you hit 300K, I think is the first break point where if you roll a 1 at the beginning of the game, you can lose half your treasury. At 300 and 400K, I would consider spending and buying something. Um, Something you can do with tour play is you can hire an assistant coach and you can fire it for 10K. So if you're at like 300K, you can buy an assistant coach for a game, and maybe it makes a difference breakpoint wise as far as inducements. But you can also fire them with there's no penalties. You can't buy rerolls and you can't fire rerolls. So you can buy a reroll, but you can never take it off of your roster. So if you're trying to manage your treasury, the assistant coach thing is the most effective. If you want to do 5 at a time, you could like fire your apothecary and hire a new apothecary. But staying under specific thresholds, and once you get to 500 or 600K in your treasury, you actually have it is rare for you to not lose money of some kind. And 500 is the first break point where you can roll a 1 and lose almost all of your treasury. And so at that point, you really need to consider keeping your treasury intact for strategic purposes for playoffs or even just during the regular season if you need wins. Now that's like a crazy luxury. I think most of the time if you have that much money, your season has gone really well because that's a factor of the number of touchdowns you've scored. It's a factor of the fan factor that you had. It's the factor that you haven't had to replace a whole lot of players. We've seen some teams that don't have a ton in the treasury, and every time we go to look at them, they have like 50K. That's because they've had to replace somebody. So that's treasury management is an aspect of the league that you really gotta consider, and it's easy to overlook.
On rerolls. So rerolls, I think it's interesting. Like you mentioned, you can't take rerolls off your team once you've hired them on. Is there do you have like a number in mind that you try to like stay at, or do you just try to get to your number of rerolls early? It's like, what factors would you have in deciding whether or not you want to take another reroll at this point in the season?
Right. So the the reason to have more rerolls on your roster is if you are worried about, I think the number one concern, number two concern, we'll say it number two. The number two concern for the number of rerolls you have should be something like Halfling Master Chef. If you are giving your opponent so many inducements and they take Halfling Master Chef and they just smoke all of your rerolls for one half, is that a disaster for your team, right? If you have four rerolls, you're guaranteed to have at least one left over. If you have two rerolls, then the Halfling Master Chef is like a 50-50 to just take all of your rerolls. Um, Now, the primary concern for rerolls for a team is how many do I need to actually score touchdowns, right? Um, Rerolls buy you out of trouble if you roll double skulls on blocks, but especially three agility teams, rerolls are your primary safety net against dropping the ball in bad places, and you get to make more offensive plays. So as a season progresses and your team becomes safer on blocking, just due to the nature of the way the block skill works, and that you can get it on players. Um, uh, you need rerolls to help move the ball, especially if you're playing like a chaos team, or if you're playing a team that doesn't have innate ball handling skills. You need those rerolls so that you can actually win the game. And so I think three rerolls is the sweet spot for a lot of teams. I would consider going up if it doesn't make the inducement math go crazy. Just because rerolls, if you have a bad game dice wise, rerolls are your hedge against that. And so buying more rerolls basically makes your dice have to be that much worse to win a game, to lose the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Other aspects of team management as that I've been thinking about, kind of getting closer to the end of the season, you know, kind of like back against the wall, needing to like win out some games, like trying to figure out how to develop players from here on out as far as like skills and trying to figure out what to take. Like, do you think there's a point in a season where, you're top of the leaderboard in your division? Is there a point where you start to look more towards skills that you just want for certain scenarios? Like, are you trying to specialize your players a little bit more, or are you still just trying to keep it as generally applicable as possible?
Right. Yeah, that you kind of have to do like a little bit of prognosticating going forward. There are, and I mean, ultimately, the decisions kind of hedge around a couple of skills, right? Like tackle is a great skill, um, where there are some matchups where you just don't have enough tackle. You look at Amazons on the roster and you're like, well, if every single one of my models had tackle, I wouldn't be mad in this game. Whereas if you're playing against dwarves, or you're playing against chaos dwarves, you're playing against a couple of the chaos teams or some of the undead teams, tackle's good against select models, but not widely applicable. And so, um, I think interest like a lot of people like to make a character that's good at trying to strip the ball from people. If they find themselves in a scenario where a ball carrier is just like out in the open, if you've got a wrestle strip ball character that can go knock that ball over, that's pretty good. But if you take strip ball and somebody takes sure hands, now they've kind of like counterpicked against you. You've traded team value effectively. It's a little bit more in favor of the sure hands because the sure hands at least has the added value of a re-roll to pick up the ball. Um, you know, uh, that's just kind of like a interesting cagey maze circular logic thing that you can find yourself in. Like if I take this thing and they take this thing, sometimes you just kind of gotta put the best team that you can on the table and then let the dice fall wherever they're gonna fall. I like having models for specific scenarios on my team. I like having, but I also do like having generically good stuff um, as a baseline. I think some teams are better at making those specialized characters because they have people who start with a lot of skills versus some of the teams that, it's a struggle to get block on people to start with, and then you can start worrying about what else you want to do. So it's a weird place to be. I think like humans and orcs are fine teams to make some specialists on, and elves is another one where you can make some specialist elves pretty fast just because you can kind of choose an elf to get touchdowns with in a game if you are running your offense in a nice tight pattern. So you can make like a sneaky get dirty player lineman elf relatively easy, and then that's your dedicated fouling piece. Whereas uh, chaos teams, you got to get a block before you can worry about making like an extra arms, very long legs on the ball beast man who's good at trying to intercept the ball if your opponent's trying to pass, right? That's always been a pipe dream of mine to have the beast man who like goes and interferes on like a two or whatever.
Mhm.
But realistically, there's not enough star player points in the world to make that character actually work. So
Yeah. Yep. Any final thoughts on management aspects? More information to divulge to other players in the league.
yeah, I mean, knowing when to use an apothecary in the game, I think is tricky. I'm in the camp of use the apothecary aggressively um, early in a season, and then use the apothecary for models that can't be replaced if they get killed. And so, if you are holding an apothecary through the whole game and you never used it, technically you wasted some team value. Um, but I think you would rather be safe than sorry in a lot of instances, right? One of the things that you can overdog towards the end of the season, like with your inducements, is the extra wandering apothecaries, just to make sure if you have a game where your opponent rolls multiple deaths on you, you've got some apothecaries at least to keep them patched up. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's lots of things to keep in mind as people are progressing through this latter part of the season. And we've got our week 8 preview now. WSN Division, we've got Might of Asgard and the V Stars. This game has heavy implications for this division.
yeah, if this is not a good matchup on paper for the V Stars. I think this is a game that is particularly scary if you are the Wood Elves, because you can end up getting a lot of players hurt in this game. And so, uh, but if he wins this one, then he's got some good playoff chances. If he loses this one, then or if this is I think Austin is happy with a draw here.
Mm.
But Mike, a draw would not be great. He needs like a win to really kind of help shore up his position headed towards the playoffs. Austin wants the win as well. I think Austin's got a little bit of wiggle room, not a ton, but he's got a little bit of stuff that can go wrong in the season. So yeah, I mean, this is one Mike's gotta he really wants this win.
Next game up is actually a recap. Jolly Rotters get a bounce back game 2-1 over Book of Grudges. It was a game where Chaos Dwarfs took some secret weapons, and the secret weapons did not work out.
Yeah, it looked like Bomber potentially blew himself up in this game. And then it looks like he was forced to put Nabla onto the field for a drive, who then got kicked out. He had a bribe. I have to wonder if the bribe even worked.
Mhm.
It might have been one of those where you even rolled a one for the bribe to keep Nabla in. I don't know. I don't know. It looked like a debacle for Ide.
Yeah.
I actually I think he's on the teetering edge of catastrophe here. He's lost like three of his last four games, and his team has been absolutely punished in these games. He's taken quite a bit of damage, and so he's had to replace players. So uh, I moving forward, I needs some help to look a lot better. And Clay like moved right up to position four in the standings. You've got, as I mentioned before, the three people who are kind of like keeping everybody out of the top three, and then Clay is like the next gatekeeper. So
We've got GG's of Electric City versus of Salesman. Blackworks are missing their troll for this game, I believe. But if you look at the rest of the Blackrock roster, there's been some pretty solid development. You got a couple block Mighty Blow orcs, some sneaky gets goblins, and a couple excellent randoms that got rolled on this lineman as well. Got a block on a goblin and then a tackle goblin.
yeah, tackle goblin's kind of crazy against other stunties. Just having a goblin that can go knock over um, just other stunties is just really good.
Mhm. Yeah, being able to also have something that is actually on equal strength with the human catcher can go down. Like, with an assist, you've got two dice with a goblin into that catcher with tackle. So
You're right. It's extremely relevant for this game.
yeah. After that, we got Halfling Justice return to Monkey, the stunty face off of this division.
Right. In the past, Wayne was worried about this matchup. Now that Sean's got four, or sorry, six ogres instead of four, Wayne will get some inducements. But like ogres are, they're like a real, and they've got block now. Like they've then so ogres are like a real threat to everything that's on the pitch for Wayne. Normally, tree men just kind of get to go wherever they want. They don't go very fast, but they just get to go wherever they want. They get to beat up whoever they want. Um, but in this, you don't really want like your treeman getting beat on by a bunch of ogres. It'll stack up. You don't want them getting fouled by Noblars either. And halflings themselves can't outrun the ogres, right? The ogres and the halflings are the same speed,
Mhm.
and so if you've got an ogre tying up a couple of halflings, like you just base halflings the whole game with ogres, and one halfling fails a dodge at the start of a turn, and ogres get free crack at the halflings. This is like a nightmare scenario, uh, you know. So yeah. Now, it really comes down to inducements. I still think Griff is probably good in this game, but uh, he's not like safe.
Mhm.
All of the ogres get two dice into him, and so you're asking a lot from Griff to win the game.
All right. Next up, Righteous Brimstone's Teal Terror. That's my matchup for the week. Um, my view on this game, I've got a skill. I've got one skill to take, I think, which is probably going to be tackle on a Troll Slayer. Um, just to hopefully keep the Witch Elves. I think there's one other dodge player at bay, but it's going to be very interesting. Played a lot of Dark Elves recently, so
Yeah,
uh, looking to hopefully get some SPP, maybe get some casualties or like a touchdown on like specific players is kind of what I'm going for in terms of just like a management, just like trying to get skills heading into the last 4 weeks of the season because that's going to really be the make or break point. And hopefully, get some more, the MVP on a death roller would be nice, but
Yeah. Did you get
well,
an MVP in the first game? Oh, nice.
yeah, adding insult to the injury,
Yeah,
the
that's pretty good.
skeletons. So, uh, then we've got our last game of this division is the Rotten Peaches versus the Rot Skitterfangs,
Nope, yep,
the new Skaven team.
right. So John's going to be sick of Skaven after this game, I'm pretty sure. And is Skaven like Skaven is not necessarily what you want to play against with Amazons, because gutter runners are just that annoying for the team. Now John's got some skills. He's playing against a fresh team. This team is right out of the box. He is going from where he would get inducements to now he is not getting inducements, and in fact is giving like 300K or whatever to his opponent. So there's all kinds of stuff that he could end up playing against, that could be particularly nasty for him. Um, but his Amazon team is like, of my on my radar of teams to beat in the league,
mhm.
right? Like the anytime you sit down for a game, you have to ask yourself, would I rather have my opponent's team or my team for this game? And I think a lot of times, if when I'm looking at John's team, I'd be like, I'd rather be in John's seat in this game, just because his team is like really developed.
Yeah. Excellent development for the Amazons over the season so far. Snake Eyes Division got the Southern California Trojans versus Zero Luck Chucks. More elf on elf violence this week. Dark Elves getting quite a chunk of inducement money.
Yeah, they've got Eldril, Jordell, Maple, Zote money. Like you can pick one of those to play. There's an argument for literally all of them. Uh, the Zote is a very interesting anti-elf inducement because of Prehensile Tail, the 5 strength, the Mighty Blow, um, and the once per game Hypnotic Gaze. But Eldril is on once a turn Hypnotic Gaze. Eldril is like kind of crazy. This might actually be your first chance to play with either Jordell or Maple, in a game. Maple also seems crazy. Maple's probably better than the Zote, even though Maple is slower. But uh, Maple is like got tentacles, and that is a bad thing to have elves get caught by. So
Sure. Chase also kind of a bit of a hot streak going into that game
yeah,
on a pretty good winning streak. So
yeah. Chase has got a really good streak going right now. So
up next, I got Electric City Maulers and Bad Moon Rising. No idea when this game is going to happen,
right.
but so we might have some updates. Why not? We don't know what each team's going to look like going into this one.
Yeah,
It's a little bit.
this one's harder to predict for sure. I would just generically say that Necromantic loves seeing teams where they've got like big guys, because you're so good at tying up big guys with zombies. Um, and then that leaves the werewolves free to go hunt wherever the ball is. So um, Now, if the big guys just chew through the zombies, that's a problem. And I don't know that Jim's team has developed to where they are good at taking on that dark elf. Um, so I mean, that dark elf is really like the it's the centerpiece of that team,
Mhm.
right now. So
Next up, ROUS versus Plague of Gods. This is a big mismatch between the two teams in terms of you got Skaven, very fast, very agile, and the two kings are there to just beat you into the ground. So
Yeah, and this is another one of those extremely important games for playoff picture. Both people have the same number of points right now, and there's actually a three-way tie at 9 points in that division. Juan's got the head-to-head over Coop. So Juan beating Ness would give him the head-to-head. Also, it's like a double win, right? It's like you get to move ahead three, you get to keep them back
mhm.
three. And so Juan would then basically move up into that number 8 spot for the division, um, and get to play gatekeeper from that point forward. And I think Juan's had like a really tough schedule. I think he's played a lot of the people in the top 8 so far. So yeah, Juan wants to win that one, but Ness has proven to punch outside of his weight class in a lot of these games this league. So I'm interested. I'm interested in the outcome of this.
Yeah.
If I had to put money on it, I'd probably put money on Juan. But that's just I think gambling on Juan is um, one, it's thematic, um, and then two, Juan's pretty crafty, and he doesn't really pull punches.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I'll be interested in seeing what the inducement game looks like for the Tomb Kings here because they're getting, you know, $1 billion conservatively. So next we've got the Blood Moon Gang and Dodge This. Um, we've got goblins on one side, slightly less but slightly sturdier goblins on the other side,
Yeah,
accompanied by some orcs. So
yeah, I'm sure the body count for goblins is going to be pretty high in that game. The I do think that Black Orcs match up well into the stunty teams because Grav is just really good against stunties. You get extra hits on stunty players, and uh, the usually the hard part of dealing with stunty players is getting them on the ground in the first place. If you can reliably put stunty players on the ground, you will reliably get casualties against them. Um, and so I think Nate's got the advantage in this game. But I just you never know with goblins. You
yeah,
never know.
yeah, yeah. Another game with a good amount of stunty players in it. The Great Tree Good Boy Use versus the Slee Stacks. This
It's like a weird
interesting.
matchup on paper,
Yep.
right? Because the lizardmen are fast. They can keep up with everything on the gnome team.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think if somebody with like a little bit more lizardmen experience than Jeremy might be in a better position to win this game. I think Jeremy's still figuring out the lizardman formula. Uh, Sauruses are kind of the backbone. The skinks are what like makes the team go. Um, but Sauruses are like how you hurt your opponent. And I think gnomes are pretty good at tying up and keeping the Sauruses partitioned away from wherever the ball might be. I think Jeremy's needs to like learn how to get his Sauruses free
Hmm.
from the scrums. And I think if he does that, then he'll have kind of like turned the corner on Lizardmen, but kind of putting them together as far as like how to play them for a season. I think Will's probably going to win this game, but Jeremy's also somebody who inflicts damage on teams that he plays against.
Hmm.
So while his win rate does not necessarily coordinate to the danger of playing him, if that all jives.
Yeah.
So,
I know, like earlier talking about gnomes, you mentioned that gnomes are typically better into some of those mashy teams than other stunty teams would be. But I think part of that too, like we didn't talk about as much, but like jump up, being able to like get up, get away from person. But
Lizardmen are
skinks,
fast.
yeah, skinks will keep pace with a gnome, even standing up from prone.
Yeah,
So that's gonna be
right.
it's gonna be
And
harder to keep away from
yeah,
those
and like
players.
having a skink do a one die on a ball carrying gnome has a pretty good chance of actually dislodging it,
Mhm.
especially if you're willing to. throw a reroll at it.
Last game for this division is your game, Slaughterhouse 11 versus no.
Yeah. So Morales, so I think Morales and I are 50-50 in the last in the games that we've played. I think we've played 4 games.
Mhm.
Two of them actually at tournaments. Um, and then we've played 2 league games. Now there might be another game in there that I'm blanking on right now. But we're 50-50 in those games. So whoever wins this game gets to jump ahead in the head-to-head count lifetime. Um, and I'm giving him some inducements. I haven't really figured out how much yet.
Mhm.
I bought my 4th Bloodseeker, um, and then so my team is like ridiculously bloated team value wise, and so part of me was expecting, because I'm playing corn, for the blood to flow on my team. I was expecting Marauders to die, but that has not been the case. And so I'm torn between giving the Marauders a chance to die in honorable combat or just firing them. Uh, so I haven't made my decision yet. So
And last game of the week, Imperial City Retainers playing against the Gnarly Oaks. Um, this one is interesting. It's kind of a rough spot to be in where you're coming in as a player who's been on a bit of a losing streak. You're playing against someone who's making a deep run in their division, and you, as a player with the worst record, is giving that other person inducement money.
wow, yeah, yeah. Sean's still got a game to play, and it's against Jim.
Mhm.
So you could take some damage in that game. That's the nature of the way claws works. So he could take damage. I mean, I think that the thing about Old World Alliance is that your team value ends up being really, really low. And so I do think Skaven, like if the tree man gets a casualty in that game that isn't from a line hit at the start of a drive, I think you've done something terribly wrong as a Skaven player by letting the tree man impale anybody on your team. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the speed is it's clearly the greatest factor in that game. I wouldn't let Sean's reputation intimidate you going into it. If I'm Fred, uh, uh, Sean's clearly a very formidable opponent, but at the end of the day, it's still Blood Bowl. You could still roll lights out against your opponent and win.
That is it for our week 8 previews. What's your overall vibe on this week so far? Like, what do you think next week when we come in? What what are you
Yeah,
expecting?
I'm like I like where I'm at in the league. Uh, I like where my team is at. Especially like where my team is at in comparison to other people. Now I'm going to end up playing against mummies, and these mummies. When I played against Clay, these mummies were a problem. So it can always go wrong. So if I come in next week and I'm mad, it's because mummies beat me up. So
Well, let's hope we don't have a mad start to the fight this week. Yeah, appreciate y'all for listening to us talk on this again. Really appreciate all the support, all the views, likes, follows, subscribing to Substack. It's all been great. If you want to keep hearing more, just continue to do those things. Find 2 friends. Tell them to also do those things. Have them find 2 friends.
yep,
We can build the great empire pyramid.
you're in at the initiate level right now. You get 2 friends to join the podcast network. We'll move you from initiate to underling level. And yeah, you keep walking up the pyramid, taking steps up the pyramid of success.
Yeah, yeah. And if you need us to audit your dice, we also offer those services. Yeah, appreciate y'all listening, and we'll catch y'all next week.
Yeah, goodbye, everybody.